A lot of other religions were cyclical. We had the pagans followed the seasons. The Buddhists, you reincarnate and you're going in circles. Whereas Christianity was like, no, we're going forward. We're going to create heaven on earth. Fundamentally, if you take this very seriously, this is like a technological story, right? Like creating a city is like inherently like a technological endeavor.
Welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast, where we discuss how to run your business like a saint. Before we get started, if you haven't already, check out The Saintly CEO. This is our free weekly newsletter that will teach you how to run your business more like a saint. Each email has two main things. One is a kind of lesson that is under 5 minutes to read about how to insert the faith into your business. And then we also have a curated list of other Catholic business owners and entrepreneurs, as well as what they're working on, so that you can discover other people like you, other people who share the same mindset, who share the faith and share the ambition, so you can network with them and get to know other people. It's totally free, so sign up today. All right, and it comes out every Monday at 7 a.m. Central. All right, so today's episode is going to be a little bit different than usual. We don't necessarily focus on one particular topic as a central point. We kind of wandered a lot about Will's journey and then just many different things that came up through the conversation. And the whole point here is Will O'Brien is my guest. So the backstory here is I came across Will because he was on the podcast My First Million, which is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a very popular show. I think it gets probably about 100,000 downloads per episode, somewhere thereabouts. And it's very popular specifically amongst, let's say, kind of online business bros is kind of how I would describe it. The kind of people who think when they're in a restaurant, how much is this place making per hour? Those type of folks. So I heard him mention something in the course of the conversation. I thought, he might be Catholic, and then later on he mentioned it explicitly. So I DM'd him on Twitter, and we got the podcast set up. I actually DM'd him before I heard him say he was Catholic, because I was just so curious to learn more about this guy. And so we set up the podcast. And in general, what he's building is a hardware tech startup that makes autonomous vehicles for the ocean, so above ocean and then below ocean, to do various things. There's going to be defense applications as well as like ClimateTech applications as well. It's very cool. If you want to learn more about the tech and the opportunity and all of that, I would go check out the episode that he did with My First Million. I will link that in the description as well. Today is obviously much more focused on the faith in general and a couple other kind of broader topics that involve Catholicism. He did recently return to his faith, and he's living in Silicon Valley, and so he's got a wide range of kind of things that he's able to see and he's able to bring to the discussion. I thought was quite interesting. It does get quite philosophical at times. So because it's such a wide-ranging conversation, I wanted to offer this to you. If you're uncertain, whether or not you should sink over an hour of your time into this, let's put it this way. If you are a Catholic entrepreneur who is very ambitious, wildly ambitious, maybe you have dreams of becoming a billionaire one day, or maybe you believe that you will become a billionaire. You're not doing it for money's sake or whatnot, but you're very ambitious. Let's put it that way. This is a good episode for you. Will is the kind of person that you're going to want to hear from, and you're going to resonate probably a lot with the things he says. As an editorial note, we had a lot of technical difficulties recording this. Many times we lost internet connection. So if there is kind of a glitch or a weird sounding, flow in the editing, that's why. Give us some grace here. I think the devil was after us while we were recording this one. But it's a really fun episode. I know it was probably my favorite episode I've recorded to this day. And I know so because as soon as these shows get done, if it was a great episode, I just run to my wife and I say, oh man, I just got to talk to this awesome person doing these cool things. And I just go on my rant. And that's when I know it was amazing. And this is definitely probably one of the top tier experiences I have had as a interviewer of somebody. So it's a great show. You're going to love it. Tune in and listen to the whole thing. Don't skimp out, okay? It's a great show. All right. Enjoy the episode. All right, welcome to the show, Will. How you doing today?
I'm doing really well.
I'm super excited to have you. So I guess let's just jump straight into it. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing with Ulysses.
Yeah, my name is Will O'Brien. I'm Irish. I grew up in Cork in the south of Ireland in a town called Ballincollig. After that, I went to college in Dublin. UCD worked in Dublin for a few years, and I live in San Francisco now. Last year, we moved our company, Ulysses, here, and for work. One of the founders of a company called Ulysses. We're building general purpose autonomous robots for the ocean. So effectively what we've done is we've built like a new class of vehicle for the oceans. This is a vehicle system that can work at the surface but also subsurface. So we have these autonomous surface vehicles moving around at the surface, and then we have this first of a kind launch and retrieval system that can deploy daughter subsurface vehicles beneath to go and do critical tasks. So what this this finally enables us to do in the ocean is kind of get humans out of the water in some of these critical tasks. The ocean is this critical domain across, keeping people fed, keeping our oceans safe, or even just for, general prosperity. And a lot of the critical tasks still have humans out there. So while you have people trying to build like humanoid robots on land to automate things, we're doing kind of similar kind of work there in the ocean. So that's a bit of
you picked a really easy domain to work in, man. Really easy stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's partly why it's a good business, really. Like there's definitely always an aspect of like, kind of run towards the fire or something like that, and then you'll find like a good business idea. Like engineering in the ocean is very difficult, of course, but I think that can be good as well for defensibility and other things. And yeah, I mean, like the ocean is a very under innovated in domain. Still, like a lot of the technology that the ocean runs on is the same technology my parents or grandparents would have been, familiar with in their day. Our greatest minds are not working on problems related to the oceans. They're working on problems related to space. They're working on problems working to our skies or like domains on land. And we want to get those smart people working on the oceans.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about presenting the opportunity, right? It's quite interesting to think about the opportunities in difficult areas because there's nobody working on it. Because there's, like you said, I don't feel like there's anybody doing else what you're doing. Maybe there's one or two like piddling around, but it doesn't seem like they're at the scale you are. So that's an interesting perspective. But as a Catholic, sometimes you're like, oh, I need to provide for my family, and I want to do entrepreneurship. Maybe I won't do the hard thing, right? Maybe I'll do the easy thing, like making lawn. So there's always this dichotomy of where you are in your state in life,
Yeah, like for me, like it is. You're right. It's a balancing act, right? Like you want to look after yourself, and then you want to look after your family and your close family, and then beyond that your kind of community, and then you want to do something for the world, and then you also want to do something for Christ as well, and like, so I think this is like ultimately like the balancing act is like how do I do something for Christ, and how do I do something for my family, and then but then like you also have to be excited about it as well. So like this is a very difficult question. How do you do this? How do you unify those things? But I feel that trusting intuition and those sorts of things generally I find, for me anyway at least, is the kind of best way to kind of get a sense of where do I fall on the spectrum of balancing all these things, and how do I find this like optimal mix?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a tough question. I do want to point out for people, if anybody wants to hear a lot more about what you do with the company itself and the opportunity, I would highly recommend checking out the two of the other podcasts you've done. One in particular, obviously where I found you from, which is My First Million.
Yeah.
If anybody's listening wants to check it out, he goes into a lot more detail there. We're going to talk more about the faith today.
Yeah.
But it is definitely cool stuff, and I have my Moon Should Be a State on shirt today, so we're cool. Definitely in the same camp.
Awesome.
But so I do want to know. Oh yeah, Mike's great. Tell me more about how your faith has what role has faith played in your career, and maybe some of the evolution on how you think about this very question around purpose and what do we work for and who do we serve.
Yeah, I suppose this is a good kind of segue into maybe me talking a bit about my spiritual journey, because I think that kind of like naturally leads to the answering of this question. Myself, like many other Irish people, born and raised in Ireland, I'm about as Irish as it gets, right? Like I did a 23andMe, and it's like 99.9% Irish, 0.1% Neanderthal. I'm O'Brien on one side, Murphy on the other. Like it's Irish all the way back, and in fact, it's all like Cork and Kerry, right? Like it's like the south of Ireland. Like yes, there's an embarrassing level of overlap. And
you're very proud. You're very proud about it on Twitter. I've noticed that.
Yeah, I am. I was best country on earth. So, but naturally, so I was raised Catholic, went to a Catholic school, Catholic boys' school, was raised in the faith. However, and this is a critique I'd level of at least Catholic schooling in Ireland, and I think like some aspects of the church is like I never felt like I was in the driving seat with my faith growing up. I was in the passenger seat. I was being kind of spoon fed all of this learn about the sacraments, learn about the Beatitudes, learn about these, learn it all off, and it's kind of like, and maybe my heart wasn't open, right? Maybe I had to, because I did leave the faith for a while. I was kind of like, I wasn't a believer for a while, and at least I wasn't a believer in Christ. But I feel, Yeah, I basically grew up kind of spoon-fed Catholicism, but I didn't ever really feel a deep personal connection to it. Even though I volunteered in our church, I was an altar server, I did some readings in our local church. But if you asked me questions about the Bible, if you asked me questions about just even historical aspects of Christ's life, I wouldn't have had answers. And look, maybe it's this typical teenager thing, I'm too cool for this, and I think this is an interesting question, probably like how do you parent, and raise children?
I think this is just to jump in. I think this. I've actually been thinking. I didn't plan to talk about this, but this is something I've been thinking about a lot. We just had our first daughter. She's almost 6 months old now, and I
Congrats.
think about it with thank you with parenting is that God doesn't force us to love Him. Just like when you look at Catholic schooling in general, it's kind of like you're almost trying to force your kids to be Catholic when they're older, right?
Yeah.
And it's all with that in mind. It's completely counterintuitive to the way God treats us, which is He is just there and He allows us to question and to come to Him. And I think that if we took a more of a position of being a guide and helping them understand the faith, it would probably go a lot better. And like you said, you would feel like you were in the driver's seat.
Yes, exactly. I think basically, yeah, you don't want to force your kid to go to practice, but you do want to maybe take them for a Sunday after practice. He's like
Yeah.
you don't want to make your kid go to mass, but you want to be like, if your kid answers some questions right, or tells you things, like you get them a little present or something like that, and you make them, and you do that, and then like I think naturally, just like the word is so nourishing that like when they go into it themselves, it becomes a perpetuating cycle. So you just want to tee them up for that. I think the best thing was that I got the sacraments. I got confirmed, I got
Yeah.
communion and all
Yeah.
that. Which makes coming back to it, obviously much easier.
Much easier.
I didn't have to go down that path. So I think I'm very blessed in that, and in that regard, that I had that. But I didn't have a strong faith. And I remember meeting my first atheist when I was about 13 or 14, and him just obliterating me, and me being like, oh my, like he had just read the classic like Dawkins. He was like a 13-year-old like nerd who'd like read the Dawkins like book, and like I just was like so obliterated by everything I'd never come across before. And I just remember being like, oh my, and they were laughing at me, and I think that started my kind of segue out. And I remember it was first year school tour. I was probably 13 years of age. I was in London, and just being like, oh my. And I think that just like started a fall away. Then I was in college in Dublin, and I think one thing I've noticed that with a lot of people of different faiths is like college is where we kind of fall out, but then kind of people kind of boomerang back towards the end of college. It's just, you're just exposed to a lot of things like drinking, partying, like all these sorts of things that, lust and women, all these sorts of things. So it's like the last thing on a lot of people's priorities is like, oh, I'm going to go to mass on a Sunday. But you know what? And during that time, I kind of fell away from I became, like a lot of people in the West, enamored by Eastern thought, and started actually looking into Buddhism and reading about it. And then one day I got a brainwave. I just kind of was like, I want to go to Nepal. I want to live with Buddhist monks. I want to like try that out. I was like, I have these summers in college that, I could party or whatever, get a job in Dublin, but I want to do something a bit random, a bit different. I only have a few of them, and I plan to work after that, so I want to use my summer as well. So I was like, okay, how do I do that? So I taught myself how to teach English, and I started applying for jobs in work monasteries as an English teacher, and I got one. So packed up the bags, shaved the head, flew to Nepal, much to the dismay of my poor mother. Was like, jeez, he's going to Nepal, what are we going to do? But she, interesting enough, she did set me up with one Irishman out there. And an interesting segue story, I was out running one day, and I bumped into this random Nepali guy who had a Galway Bay 5K t-shirt on. And I asked him, I was sorry, pal, like, this is rural Nepal, like, we're hours, he's like, where'd you get that? Like, Galway Bay is, whatever, 2 and 3 hours from where I'm from. He was like, oh, well, I know this guy, and he owns this charity here in Ireland. I work with him. And I was like, it's so funny. That's like the guy my mom like put me in touch with. So small world. So your mother will always have your back no matter where you are in the world. They can have people everywhere. It's like the CIA or something like that.
Yeah, we have people everywhere.
Exactly, yeah. So the most well-connected network in the world. So anyway, I went out there. Cool, interesting, learned a lot about Buddhism, but you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, and like faith is a leap, and like I just didn't feel myself really enamored by it. I learned some interesting philosophical ideas while I was there, like, and I took some interesting ideas away from that time. But I wasn't a Buddhist. I knew that. I knew I wasn't like, and it was so funny. Like it's, we love to glorify the East in the West, like and put it on a pedestal. It's like they're all the same as us. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing like they don't have any special insights. I think we put the Eastern philosophy on too much of a pedestal here.
Probably because it's different, right? Probably because it's just unusual compared to what we're used to. It's just novelty.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so different to ours. But I also think a part of it comes from like guilt as well. I think people are unable to separate the kind of bad things people in the West have done from Western thought. And I think that leads to people being anti-capitalist or anti, Western thought, or like, and I think they're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater with some of these critiques of the West. And I think then that leads to a gravitation towards the East because it's seen as soft and gentle, and whereas the West is just bad, big, bold, and evil, or something like that. But so anyway, I go through that, and then in college, then the following year, and I just keep being drawn to going to mass, and I'm like Ash Wednesday, going Ash Wednesday, I'm just like, I knew there was something in, like, there was like an internal pull in my soul, and through like, honestly, initially through aesthetics, I was just like so still enamored by like thing, and that's one of the ways God speaks to us is through aesthetics and through beauty. What we find beautiful is one of these Aristotelian ways in which truth is revealed to us, the good, the true, and the beautiful. So I was like drawn to that, and then I remember I was about to join a prayer group again on campus, and then COVID happens. So then I'm locked up back home in Cork, but still thinking about it, and the cogs are turning, and then that kind of brings us through 2020, 21, and then I have a buddy. And I'm just kind of peppering him with questions every time we're talking about the faith. And I'm like, what's he was Protestant, but I was like, tell me about it. And he's like, Will, you're asking me so many questions. If you just read the Bible with me. In fairness to him, there's probably two people I have to thank the most for me coming back to faith. It's him and another friend, Fergus and Pertouche, and both Protestants. Both are non-denominational, but I've so much to be thankful for them for. So I start reading the Bible with him again, Matthew, and then Luke, and going through the Gospels, and then I'm like, and then I'm doing research on my own time. I'm like, obviously Christ is, I'm very convinced by like the factual nature of Christ. I'm doing research on that. And I'm like, oh wow, all this evidence that existed, and then I'm like reading it, and I'm like, oh, the moral teachings are just like self-evident, like you just feel it in your bones. So then I'm reading the Bible regularly with my friend Fergus, and then I'm doing my own research, and I'm like, okay, I'm convinced of the factual evidence for Christ, and I'm looking at like miracles and Fatima and all this, and I'm like, wow, this is real, like historically, even if I was an atheist, I can agree that these people existed and they did these special things. And then you're just like reading, and it's like, it's like self-evidential that the moral teachings here, you're just like reading through the Beatitudes or something, and you're like, oh my, these are just like, if these were like tweets, they'd go viral. They're just like, they're bangers. Like, they're just mic drop after mic drop, and you're just like, this is incredible. And then and then just like really strongly aesthetically, like, I'm like just so, going to mass, and I'm like, so beautiful, like this is just like incredible, and I'm looking at Christian art, and I'm like, wow, this is I'm seeing feeling sort of attracted to it. But even at this stage, maybe like 2021, started 2020, I'm not like really, like I'd say necessarily like a believer just yet. And then what really kind of brought me to it then was when I was going to my first prayer group. So my friend Pertouche, he hosts a home church, and I'm going to that when it's actually in San Francisco. I have some interesting thoughts on San Francisco and faith, by the way, but some hot takes. And then I'm at that, and it's my first time being with like a big group of people in like a small group talking, and it's my first time in like a small group of people like reading the Bible and talking about it really like in depth with like multiple people, and hearing other people's personal experiences, and it's like pretty open, and everyone's like talking about their lives and what's going on, and we're praying for each other, praying on each other, and then we're breaking bread and eating food afterwards, and there's all sorts of ages there, babies and adults and old people, and I do this multiple times, and I'm just like, and it's kind of driving home from one of them, I'm like, God, it's like I believe on all these axes, and I'm like, I feel so energized from this. I'm just like, it's like this is real. I'm a believer again, and I'm like, so that's when I kind of come back to it. So then that's like maybe.
Did you have apprehensions to like, oh, if I do this, that means I got to change my life, or like was it just like you kind of have that intellectual honesty. It seems like you have that. So it's like once you recognize that you couldn't go away.
So for me, it's actually, I always have this apprehension in me of like following the crowd a little bit, I'm like, and it's kind of why I love weird ideas. I love conspiracy theories. I love like doing a startup that's kind of a bit out of like left field, because I never watched the Star Wars, never watched Lord of the Rings, I've like any of these series that blow up like on Netflix. I've never watched Severance. I feel there's such an apprehension to doing what other people do, and it's a very core part of my nature. So then I'm like, there was this nagging thought in the back of my head. It's like, well, you will raise Catholic, so that's why you're a Catholic. Like that's why you want to be. You were raised Christian. That's the only reason you're coming back to this, is because you're just lost in your life, and this is like your way of like self-medicating that or something like that. Really dark and just vicious like self-talk. And I mean, that's the evil one, in my opinion, acting on me. He, as my favorite Mike Tyson quote is, if you're favored by God, you're favored by the devil, right? Like, if God's looking on you, devil's looking on you too. He's working overtime. And that moment, God was bringing me close to him, and devil was working overtime on me, being like, was being like, nah, trying to put these evil voices in my head. So yeah, and those ones are still with me to this day.
They never really go away. Yeah.
They don't. He's working overtime, especially when he sees you getting closer to God. He gets jealous. So that was my conjuring my faith. But that meant we had started Ulysses, or started talking about it at least, before I was kind of really, and I first came back to my Christian faith, but I didn't initially come back to Catholicism. And it kind of took me a while, a bit more kind of searching and talking, and kind of a similar process of just like sussing it out a little bit and going to church, and also trying out a non-denominational church, and then realizing, actually, I think these Catholic guys have it right. So yes, actually, you know what? Most of my professional life, I haven't had Christian guidance, and you know what? I compared to other people maybe on your podcast, I'm a bit newer to my Catholic faith, and even though I've been technically a member of the church since I was baptized, but I'm still kind of finding my feet a little bit more than others.
Well, talk more about that, because you said that you were having the ideas for Ulysses at the time, and then you kind of, again, maybe came back to the faith close, and then kind of came fully back to the church a little while later. But has that had a thread of how you think about it? Because I'm just going to do a little segue here. I have another podcast, that I talk about ClimateTech stuff, and usually I had found that ClimateTech people do not talk to Catholics. There's not usually, there didn't seem to be a lot of overlap. I'm finding more nowadays, but
yeah,
there's this idea that, I never understood why Catholics are so against ClimateTech, because to me it was like, well, we're just stewarding the earth, right? Like God would want us to do that.
Yeah.
So your startup is in this space to an extent, because you guys do want some carbon capture. So can you talk more about that, and if this like influenced how you think about things, or how you at least talk about it perhaps?
I mean, I'm not surprised. You know what? I'm again going to throw a hot take out there. I think a lot of the climate stuff is very pagan. It's very like Mother Earth worship kind of work. And look, I love Mother Earth, but I don't worship Mother Earth like a god. I worship a Christian god. So it's not surprising to me when you say that you haven't met many Catholics in climate. Whereas I think there's this is something I have been thinking about. Is like the kind of like, if we're to like say like what is maybe the spiritual underpinnings of ClimateTech, I think a lot of it is kind of this like Mother Earth kind of pagan.
Well, they make it above all else, right? And this is the discussion. You should meet this guy named David Valerio. You should go on his podcast too. So he talks about it from a spiritual perspective generally, but a lot of Catholics on his podcast, and he's also, I think, Eastern Catholic. And it's this purpose that you can never harm the people, right? So the workers, like, this decelerationism, that's not okay, because that would put people out of work, and that's bad. So we can't necessarily try to reverse progress just to preserve the quote unquote preserve the earth as a ball of life.
The framing I give it is like there's like anti-human environmentalists and there's like pro-human environmentalists, right? There's like some environmentalists out there that would kill every human on earth to protect the planet, right? Like they were like, you have like the Just Stop Oil people, who are kind of like on this. You literally have movements that believe that, like human extinction movements, that like believe humans, we should get off this earth. We've done too much to it. They have this kind of like, Mother Earth is this like virgin, and like we're, destroying her. Whereas like the pro-human environmentalists, in the name, they still believe in Mother Nature and like the environment, right? They believe, but there's like, they're pro-human as well, and viewing these in an integrated way where actually we want humans to flourish, right? Like that's what we want. We want human flourishing. But in order for human beings to flourish, we need to have a thriving biosphere. We need to have oceans that are clean and full of, clean from microplastics and heavy metals and pollutants, and we need to have plentiful fish stocks, and we need to have forests where we can get, berries and nuts to our heart's content, and hunt, and then farmland that is clean and pure, and rich soils that where our farm animals can eat and that is this kind of like spiritually infused environmentalism that is maybe more focused on biodiversity and these sorts of things, and from the viewpoint of like, well, if we have those things working, then human life is much richer, and that's maybe like the kind of non kind of Christian, but and if we're to get Christian about it, it's like it's the stewardship mandate, it's the dominion mandate combined with stewardship. These two things early on in Genesis, God gives us dominions over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and all over the earth. And then, he commands us to work and keep the garden. So it's taking those things very seriously there.
There's so many interesting points here. I want to talk more about stewardship. First, I want to just point out this is an interesting thing you're pointing out here is like if we try to take care of the earth as stewards, okay, and which is what we're called to do, right? We know that from the Bible. Then it forces us to be in a way more attentive to the earth and to like the things of nature, which is what we're seeing a lot of with climate technologies generally. Are in a lot of ways, one of my favorite companies is Semvita, and the companies they've spun out. I don't know if you know them, but they're using natural kind of biology to create things, right? To like create fuels or to create to help with mining, right? There's all these sorts of things they do, and it's basically using nature's blueprint or production facility, if you will, right? And this forces us to be more in tune. And it also goes back to this idea that I think St. Thomas Aquinas, I think it was asked, what's the ideal size of a city? And it's one that no matter where you are in the city, you can see the source of your food. So indicating pretty small. That's just being in touch with nature, which is effectively in many ways you could look at it as Mother Nature, but you could also look at it as the way which God speaks to us, because his creation in a way is proof of his existence, right? One of the I think it's Thomas Aquinas' 5 proofs of the faith. A bunch of those have to do with the earth and nature and kind of those balances. So this is a very interesting. I haven't gotten this far into the philosophy of this stuff before, but talk more about the stewardship angle, because you sent me this document. I don't know if you wrote this or not, but yeah, I have a feeling you did. The Stewardship Technology doc. I saw this and I was like, my gosh, I need to change everything about my life, all my podcasts. Like, I need to change everything to be stewardship tech, because this is like forward-thinking stuff right here. Tell us more about this and what it means.
Yeah, so since I've kind of come back to my Catholic faith and Christian faith, and I've been trying to contextualize what I do more and like with a richer kind of theological underpinning, from a motivational point of view, but also just like as an interesting thing. I've been thinking a lot about this, like, Christian notion of stewardship, because it so naturally overlines with like what we do today. One thing I did mention about the top of this podcast, like our first business line within this, autonomous robots for the ocean startup is for seagrass ecosystem restoration. So seagrass ecosystems are this critical ocean ecosystem, remove 35 times more carbon than rainforest. About 20% of the carbon in the oceans is stored underneath seagrass meadows. It supports about 25% of the world's fish stocks, but they're dying at a rate of about 7% per year. In the next 2 decades, we're probably on track to lose, most of the benefits of these things, which is not good. And around the world, you have all these countries panicking about it, trying to bring it back, restore it, but it's very expensive and it's very slow and it's all manual. So we've built these autonomous robots to do that. So we're doing like stewardship, right? We're tending to the land. God gave us dominion over the oceans, and we're taking that seriously, and we're tending to it, we're stewarding it, and we're bringing back the fish and bringing back the carbon storage and the biodiversity benefits and all these things. But I see a lot of I basically kind of see this kind of like divergence now in climate tech, where I think we had like this like first wave of climate tech startups, which were at least social impact startups, and this is like in the 2010s. People started taking impact more seriously, and you had the first wave boom bust of impact startups and climate startups, and I think it was John Doerr who's kind of did a lot of the investment in this world, and famously it didn't work out too well. And then you kind of have
except for Tesla, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Tesla probably the only one that worked out really well out of that batch. And then you have this like second wave, and this is kind of, I think, starting really around kind of 2016, 17 is when it started becoming popular, coincided with the release of the IPCC report. And this is, I think, where most kind of the climate tech startups come from. So it's very carbon focused, and it's very focused on basically downside mitigation and adaptation. So it's like, it's like, how do we mitigate the kind of like the climate change, and how do we adapt to it? But in my opinion, it's very like, let's reduce the kind of downside. And the second way I would describe it is very carbon centric. It's extremely like, there's this like, what I would call this like carbon dogma. And so it's extremely numerical as well. It's all about like IPCC report, numbers, gigatons, this kind of stuff, and it completely lacks any spiritual component. Even though, the reason I feel such a connection to the ocean is because I grew up in the ocean, and I grew up next to it, and I loved it, and it made me feel, it cleansed me, and it made me feel whole, it made me feel calm, it made me connect to the earth. And it was a very spiritual thing. It's not like I read the IPCC report and so I think that's kind of why and I'm starting to see, I started kind of noticing like earlier this year, like, oh, I see a lot of other people kind of, doing similar stuff to Ulysses, and I'm starting to notice a departure away from ClimateTech, and what I would describe as more kind of stewardship technologies, right? And I think, and basically kind of the thesis of this essay I wrote, which I should probably share publicly, I haven't shared it publicly, I've just shared it with friends, is that, stewardship technology is like this kind of third wave, right? So it's like, it's more proactive, it's more broad, and it's about actively managing and caring for all facets of creation. So it's not just the climate, the weather, but it's about the ecosystems, the species, the land, the water, and the air. And it's the active shaping of the trajectories, all our trajectories. So it's more comprehensive, it's more proactive, and I would also add that like it's kind of like we're actively looking to manipulate things as well, and like tend to we're trying to put ecosystems back in the ocean. And then my buddy Augustus, another Christian guy, Orthodox, he's trying to make it rain again, and then like there's another startup called Burnbot who are like actively like doing end-to-end wildfire management. So they have these autonomous like controlled burn robots that go and burn in specified areas. So, and there's like a ton of other startups I'd add to this. There's people doing living carbon, doing reforestation, Mombak doing reforestation. We have the ocean cleanup, looking after the oceans and stuff like this. But it's more active, mission of the environment, and it's reading and writing. And basically, I think I also think this is a massive business opportunity as well, right? Like, if your company can become the de facto guardian or steward of a realm, like if Rainmaker can just be the person you go to buy rain, or to buy snow from, it's like, that's $1 trillion company. If Ulysses becomes the company that you go to just have your fisheries brought back, or to have your borders looked after, or your data collected in your oceans, or these sorts of things, it's like, that's $1 trillion company, right? So because they're more than just mitigating the downsides, they're like really like towards like
it's market creation.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not just like solving for damage, but it's just like it's for creating abundance as well. It's like
it has infinite value, right? Like you kind of glossed over the data points. You said some very impressive data points about what was it again? How many people are reliant on the ocean for their
Yeah, I mean, there's 3 billion people who rely on their primary source of protein, and 1 billion as their primary source of income. So it's about it's at a minimum a kind of $3 trillion economy annually. So if you can become critical infrastructure for that, as well as just adding all this other value to it, then it's a very big company.
I mean, but also think like, again, this is not necessarily the point of today's show, but if you think about, if you're able to understand nature and be able to kind of, like you said, read and write in nature, you could apply those things to interplanetary travel. Like, once we get to Mars, we're going to need this kind of stuff, right? So like it's technology required for, even beyond this, right? So Musk might be giving you a call at some point, but
that would be cool.
But okay, so this is very good. I really appreciate this. Like I said, this to me, there's a very quick comment here, because this meant a lot when I saw this. I was like, I cannot believe somebody came up with this, because for the longest time, I felt like the Catholic side of me and the ClimateTech side of me, the ClimateTech side of me came by accident. I didn't intend to get into climate, but I did, and I actually really liked the stuff. I love the innovation in it, a lot of it. But I always felt that these had to be different. And right now, as the tide is changing in some ways in the United States, at least, it feels like, to an extent, the word climate tech is just going to go out of use. It's going to be a lot of abundance and energy efficiency, etc. And I'm just very glad to see some way that I feel I can genuinely meld these two things together, because this is the thing I always had a hard time with. I was much more quiet about my faith publicly, because I was worried, if they find out I'm Catholic, what are they going to do? Are they going to do business with me? But it's such a difficult thing to not live the truth, because it's like, if these people are treating something as absolute dogma, when I know that that's not the ultimate purpose of life, it's very hard for me. I just have to bite my tongue, and I feel intellectually dishonest. I don't know if you ever came across some instance like this in your career.
Yeah, I think the tide is changing now, and I'm energized by seeing others be more public about their faith. Like I mentioned, my friend Augustus is being very public about being Christian. My friend Pratouche as well. Like he's a VC in San Francisco, and me and him have spoken about this before, about you kind of have a duty to share your faith with others. And yeah, I mean, look, I think it's Easter Monday. We're recording here now, and we're just after coming off a historic Easter weekend from church attendance point of views. Obviously, rest in peace, Pope Francis as well. Like, that's very sad, but maybe this was his last gift. Giving us like in San Francisco, my church, busiest ever seen it. On Saturday evening, we had 80 initiations into the faith. 80, yeah, and most in its 153-year history here in San Francisco.
That's wild.
St. Dominic's Catholic Church. Friends in non-denominational churches, one non-denominational church rented out the Opera House because they were overflowing in their regular venue. We're at a very interesting time in the world right now when it comes to like the Christian faith. I'm finding it easy to be public about it, but I think I have others to thank for being maybe more open before I was, and they give me the energy and the reassurance that, oh, well, you can do this and it's fine. Relax.
Yeah, and I think part of it is just like a lot of the mind police have gone away, so it's a little easier, and then things just kind of start to come out of their shadow. But it is really nice to see. There's two things we could comment from here. I think the first thing I like to ask is more about this, I guess, being Catholic in San Francisco, because I'm getting the feeling that it's much more acceptable. It's not a weird thing anymore, even though San Francisco is weird, but that was one weird they weren't accepting of. But what's it like to be Catholic? What are the vibes there generally? I mean, it sounds like 80 conversions at one church is huge, by the way.
Huge. It's you know what? I'm very energized by. I've never met as many Christians as I have in San Francisco, which is like active Christians. I thought Ireland, we're all Catholic, and it's like, but there's a difference. Like I said at the start, being a driver in the driving seat versus being in the passenger seat. I think a lot of people in Catholic-born countries are passenger seat Catholics or passenger seat Christians, and whereas here, nearly because there's so much anti-Christian, or like at least there was traditionally, like a lot of this is the home of like maybe social justice ideals coming from places like Berkeley and stuff like that, which were very kind of like anti-religion in general, and very materialistic. I think because you have those forces acting here, then maybe people here who are Christian or like religious are more serious about it, and they're maybe more public about it because they're not the norm or something like that. And I think technology just has a tradition of having people you think differently and thinking differently, but then at moments they all think the same way. Everyone's talking about AI now, so then we do kind of we're very mimetic in ways. But mimetic desire is, people talk about it and I talk about it sometimes as a bad thing. But if the thing that everyone is being mimetic about is like believing in God, I actually don't think that's a bad thing. Or if it's like you're the product of the 5 people you surround yourself with. Like if those 5 people are great people and you're just copying them, well then what's wrong with that? So yeah, to answer your question, I think it's very Christian faith is really doing well here. People think it's a very godless city. I think that's changing. I think we're on a very positive trajectory here. I think if the trajectory keeps going the way it's going, San Francisco was always ahead of the world on a lot of things, right? Like it was ahead of the world on some of the craziness. It's always ahead of the world on technology. And if it can be ahead of the world from Christianity, and if we can turn this city more Christian, well, then I think that's just very foreboding for what's ready for the rest of the world. And you saw this last weekend. All over the world, we had record attendances in churches. So I think if we can win here, we can win anywhere.
Well, this is exactly what I thought. On my other podcast, I interviewed Peter Layden a long time ago, which he has a book called The Long Boom. If you never read it, it's an interesting way to look at, since you're probably my age range, but it's thinking about and how it felt, right? The long boom. He thinks there's another one coming, and he always talks about how things that happen in San Francisco 10 years later, they're it's going across the whole country. And I was like, as soon as I saw this, I was like, this is awesome. I just imagine all I got to do is be patient. 10 years will be good. But also, it's also, I mean, a pretty vindicating moment. It was like, now that everybody's becoming Catholic and just like pretty open about the faith, I'm like, yeah, it feels nice to have been early to this thing because I've been like this my whole life.
Yeah, true.
Because I always feel like just as a sidebar, like I always feel like I'm always right behind the trends of these things.
I know you're early on this one, yeah. Yeah, I think I generally think like converts, generally I think, or people who come back to the faith, again, they're more likely to be a driver, and drivers, they're not like a passenger, one of the people from a faith perspective that I respect the most is my friend here, and one of my friends here in San Francisco, Aditya. He's a convert. He was raised Hindu and then became Christian, but Protestant, and then became Catholic. And he's a really good blog post I can send you about his conversion. And but he's just again, because he went through the kind of conversion process, he's just so, and he's a philosophy graduate as well. So he's in Stanford, so he's very well read. But any question I ask him on the faith, he's just got the most bulletproof answer. And I have so much of an admiration for that, And I have a few friends like that, that are just really well taught out in their faith. But I think the converts in particular, they've gone through something to get there,
Exactly. Well, let's talk more about this idea of the leadership point, right? So one thing I've wondered about, at least in the community I grew up around, it doesn't seem a lot of the people are highly motivated to be leaders in the world. And kind of the principle, one of the the clips that I tried to make for when I started the podcast was imagine if Elon Musk or Steve Jobs were Catholic, imagine how different the world would be. And I just want to know your thoughts on maybe the moral take you have on why Catholics should be at the forefront of innovation and leading in this way. It can be either on the innovation or leadership side. Just kind of curious if you have any take that you would say, this is why you must do this thing.
Yeah. Well, I think, if you go back, I think that the story of humanity and Christianity by consequence is very intertwined with with technology, right? Okay, Genesis starts in the garden, Revelations ends in the city, right? The city of God. We go from a garden to the city, right? In the Lord's Prayer, we say, as it's done on earth as it is in heaven, right? This idea of creating heaven on earth, right? There's this forward projection in Christianity of we're moving, we're advancing, from garden to city, and that I think a lot of other religions previous were cyclical. It was cyclical. It was we had the pagans, we followed the seasons and stuff like that, or the Buddhists, you reincarnate and you're going in circles or whatever. Whereas Christianity was no, we're going forward. We're going to create heaven on earth. I think fundamentally, if you take this very seriously, this is a technological story, right? Creating a city is inherently a technological endeavor. It's a coordination endeavor. So I think, it's our responsibility to do that, to go from a garden to creating heaven on earth. And you can do that, stewardship is one of these ways, but there's many, many other ways that we need to do to create this heaven on earth. So I think if we're really to realize this, this kind of future end state that we're creating heaven on earth, I think technology and being involved in it and being at the forefront of it is just so critical.
I think this would be really interesting if let's say imagine you snap your fingers and all of the technologists, the smartest people we see, are all people of deep faith. And they view the perspective of, on one hand, we're trying to create this technology because fundamentally, when the Bible says we're created in God's image and likeness, it's not about how we look, it's about our nature of creation. That's my take personally. We're all co-creators within the bounds that God gave us. And on this one hand, we're trying to create, but on the other hand, and we're trying to create for heaven on earth, as you say, which most would view as kind of, to an extent, utopia, which is what a lot of techno-optimists would aim for. But then on the other hand, we have the side that accepts that suffering is actually a good thing, right? Suffering is something that brings us closer to Christ because we can connect with him in his passion, which we just read through this past week. So how do you view these things? How can somebody who has this understanding of hey, one thing is, on one hand, we're working for this optimism thing. We're trying to build this kind of heaven on earth situation. But on the other hand, we also have to be accepting of the sufferings and that we will never truly eradicate all these things until the end of time because of the fall of man. Do you have any thoughts there?
I think it's a very good point. But I think it's it's worthwhile accepting that we have limits in what we can do, in that in the same way that I like Brian Johnson, that he is very pro longevity, but don't die, or living forever. No. I disagree with that. I agree that we should increase lifespan and we should look to have a longer health span, and that would be good for humanity. I think that would be good because it solves a lot of the birth rates problems. It's just from a living an enjoyable life. I would love to see my great-grandchildren, and I think they would get a lot from having a great-great-great-grandfather around as well. I know I would have loved to have met my great-great-grandfather and great-grandfather and great-grandmother. But I think it's worth it kind of accepting the limits as well, and I think we can do that in all domains. You know what I mean? I think definitely utopian idealism is also what can lead to things like communism, and like very negative outcomes. And it's like, and like, you see this in like how Satan works. What did he try to give to Christ in the desert? Sell him all these promises. I'll give you everything. I'll give you the world. It's like, so I think you raise a very good point. Like with utopian idealism, we need to be careful that we don't start falling for his tricks. So yeah, I think that's a very fair point too.
I think the way, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking through it, because sometimes, this is why I podcast, because I can't think about things until I say them.
Yeah.
It's an unfortunate situation in this day. But I think that if we build knowing that the skills were given to us by God, and we're building for him, and we have the willingness to accept that it's going to be a painful journey, because let's be honest, being a founder, even if you're doing a small company, is definitely painful. So if we just do this and accept the kind of the journey, if you will, we can basically work out our salvation in trembling. But while we're doing these kind of things, we're trying to improve humanity. Ultimately, the most important thing, and this is what I think the fundamental purpose of this podcast is all about, is we do it in a way that we try to, at all cases, be a conduit of Jesus to other people, so that he can touch the hearts of everybody we encounter. It's not about us. It's not about, we don't want to be remembered. We want people to remember that Jesus touched them through us, perhaps, right? And I think if we do that, we can both have this optimistic, ambitious future that we're looking towards, while still accepting the sufferings that exist on earth, and knowing that we can't do everything, but we must do what's been put in front of us. We must help the things and the people in front of us, right? That's how I try to rationale through this at this point. So from there, let's talk about this. On the My First Million podcast, you mentioned some takes on how our consciousness can extend past ourselves. And I guess I'm just kind of curious, when I heard this, do you not just think that this is part of the spiritual realm of us?
Yeah.
Like, how do you reconcile this with the faith side? Because I've oftentimes wondered myself, I feel like my wife doesn't believe me sometimes, but I'm like, I can tell that person's depressed. Like, I can just walk past a person and there's a certain aura about them or vibe, and I don't know if everybody can do that or if it's just a gift. Like, I want to hear your thoughts more about this.
Yeah, well, I think like it's very clear to us, like from many of the saint stories, that some of our saints were endowed with great gifts. Levitation, manipulation, healing, matter, being like Jesus, like water into wine, telepathy to an extent, being able to just like, or like being able to just like, honestly, have just like conversations with Christ and with others, and be able to tell others what was going on, and by location, and all these sorts of things, right? So, and I think obviously Christ is the one who like was endowed with these gifts the most. But I think we're all told there's these great gifts within each of us, and I think we all believe like that. We have an incredible potential, and I think these things are like very like spiritual. I think like the same way that like the Holy Spirit communes with us is it's kind of like we're talking about the same thing here, right? Like the Holy Spirit, as well as like this ability to like you just know that something's wrong in someone else. It's working on the same like frequency. I think these things are like the same thing, the same way that like the Holy Spirit can speak to us. That's you communing with, like knowing that like there's something wrong in that person you walk past, or like the story. Every family kind of has these stories, right? Of like there's a car crash and they wake up in the middle of the night and they're like something's terribly wrong, right? Or like we feel souls from past life kind of reaching into us now in our deepest times of hardship, or we feel Christ with us. I think this is all like basically like the same plane, the spiritual plane. And basically, my point is that like a lot of like our brain is just very tapped into this. Like, I view these things as like one and the same.
Yeah, I think what I wonder sometimes, there's a couple thoughts. One is, I've always heard that verse, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. I'm like, dang, I want that. First of all, that'd be sick, right?
Yeah.
Second of all, I think, is it because I want it to be like, oh, Silas is cool, versus like, oh, that was like clearly from God type of thing. But then on the other hand, there's this this thing that people say is like, the first thing that the devil did to convince people to go away from God is that to convince people that the devil is not real in the first place, right? And I think that what if, to an extent, it's gone further to try to convince the world that spirituality is not real, or at least God is not real in its total sense, and that we don't believe in these things anymore. Because, I mean, there are so many stories and things in history where spiritual things have clearly happen, like unexplainable things. And I believe that that's still possible, but I just wonder how we can tap into it without it being some kind of a fixation where we're just trying to do it for our own glory or whatnot. But I personally have, so many family stories that I've heard growing up of encounters with spirits of some sort, or people that they thought were dead and they were asking for prayers. Like, to me, like, I thought maybe my family's just totally crazy, or maybe this is just a different kind of willingness to accept the facts.
Yeah, I think it's basically okay. Each and every one of us can tap into our spiritual gifts, and I think it's no wonder that you see like a higher prevalence of like saint stories coming out in monks and nuns, because they're practicing them every day, right? They're going out and they're working on these gifts like a muscle, right? Like, it's like, and they're living a life in line with Christ. So it's like no wonder then that they're endowed with these. So yeah, I think every human is capable of things that we don't even know we're capable of. We have and I think spiritual gifts is one of these gifts we're all endowed with.
Very good. So on this idea of things that we're capable of, if you're open to this, you don't have to do this, but if you're open to sharing it, like, what are your biggest ambitions on earth? And the reason I ask this question is I have come across a lot of people who it's not cool if you're a Catholic to talk about like being a billionaire, or to have these ambitions on earth, because they think it's just you're focused on this or life versus the next. So can you talk about that? What is your grandest ambition?
Yeah, I think getting married, finding a wife, I think would be a big one. Starting a family then with her, raising kids. I think that's like a big, like, family oriented one is like a big goal of mine. I would like to be a good son and a good brother, and a good future uncle and father-in-law, or like nephew, or these sort of things. I think being able to look back and be like, I was a brilliant son and I was a brilliant brother, and I looked after people in my family. I think that is really like at the core of it. I think being like a good Christian, having a solid faith and living like a moral life. And I think if I had that alone, that alone enough for me would be great. But I'm not going to stop there, like that. But I think that is my priority. Those things are more important to me than the rest. If I want to have a very successful startup, and if a consequence of that is making a lot of money, that would be great, because it would let me do the things that I want to do, and it would give me so much more leverage. I have so many ideas that I want to see manifest into the world, whether it be crazy technology startups, science research I'd love to fund, media I'd love to fund, people I'd love to support, family I'd love to support financially. So I think my ambitions are extremely grand in what I want to do and leave on this earth in a material sense. So I think to live that out, it's going to require making money. I think technology has been a very potent way to generate wealth for probably the last 20, 30 years. And I hope to be a part of that in some way through Ulysses, and through like other endeavors that I hope to do in my career, and I feel confident that I'll be able to do that and make lots of money. I don't feel like I need to become the richest person on earth, but I think having a lot of money, but mainly because of what it allows me to do. Like, just I have so many little things in my notes app of like projects I'd love to do, things that are faith related, things that are just personal interest related. But I want my family and kids to have a good life and be looked after well. But obviously they want spoiled kids. But I think making money is something I'm not ashamed about. I will proudly say that I would like to be a billionaire. But I think it's important that the other things come first. But I think you can do both, and I want to do both. I'm trying.
Well, this is the thing I don't get why you couldn't do both, right? I personally feel this too. It's like I had a very early experience in my life where I realized I come from a very poor family, and I realized early on through insurance sales that I was good at it. I was 19 years old, making 70 grand a year in Wisconsin with no debt, right? Like way more than I needed, right? And I was more depressed than I ever had been, because I had achieved, let's say, more than at that age, I never thought I would achieve that. And I was like, how am I so depressed that I made all this money and I have way more than I need? And even though I was spending a lot on my family, I just felt depressed. And I knew that there had to be greater ambitions. But to this day, I still feel that I do believe that as a product of my work ethic, because I just can't stop working, that I
Yeah.
will become a billionaire one day too. And I want to be able to be like Tom Monahan and be like these people who built cities, who built universities, who do things with it. Because I encounter, especially when I lived in New York, I encounter a lot of very wealthy Catholics who they fund some missions and some nonprofits here and there, but it's like they're utilizing like 1% of their wealth towards this. They're barely scratching the surface. They're keeping almost all of it for themselves to buy a new yacht. And I just don't get it, because to me, you receive that success from God. Like the outlier success only comes because God gave you the skills to achieve it. And frankly, we wouldn't call it luck, the providence to achieve it. So therefore you have a moral responsibility to return it. Not in a socialist way where it's like, you got to give it all away, but like employ other people, build families, teach others, right? And think about all of the so many Catholic families who are struggling right now. They're worried about having more kids because they just can't afford it. Both parents are working, and you could just start paying a living wage to your employees so that both people don't have to work, right? There's so many things you could do instead of hoarding more of it. And this is what I want to do. I want to be part of this movement. So that's me, and I just really appreciate you talking about it, because it sometimes feels like a lonely place to be ambitious, like a Catholic in that regard.
I think other Christians are better at this than maybe Catholics. Like at least Irish Catholics, there's a lot of kind of, or maybe Irish people in general, we're just like, we don't like talking about money, we don't like talking about achievement. There's kind of a little bit of a tall poppy syndrome at home, whereas like you don't see this amongst, and look, and this is where maybe I think some of the aspects of the Protestant church goes wrong, is they can maybe be nearly too oriented on the money, and this is when you get this crazy shit going on, mega churches with these Justin Timber, I don't know what, like I don't even know how to talk about them, but like, and maybe they go too far off the end when they're, you see these crazy mega church guys on these interviews being like, well, God told me to get the private jet, and I'm just like, did he really, like.
No, that clip was wild, man. I do not ascribe to that, but this is part of it. Again, I think there's it's going to be difficult also, because I tend to have the push to want to make so many Catholics entrepreneurs, but I also have to realize, like, okay, not everybody's called to entrepreneurship, which is fine, but we are all called to create to an extent, right? So that's the part I try to push people towards, and at least not having fear. Because if you I was talking with somebody offline today about this, but if you feel called to something by God, then why should you have fear about pursuing it? Because again, maybe your venture fails, but who says that success of the venture is necessarily success in general? Like, what if God wants the thing for you so you can have this experience and then it teaches you something? So anyways, man, this has been an amazing conversation. I feel like we could chat much longer, and I'm sure we will chat again in the future. But any last I guess calls to action with anybody anything you want to close out with?
Best place to follow Ulysses or to follow myself is on Twitter. My ad is at Will O'Brien, OBRI.
I appreciate you coming on, man. This has been great.
Yeah, I had a blast, man.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. If you enjoyed it, leave us 5 stars on your favorite podcast player. And if you're not already, give us a follow on YouTube to help us get to over 1,000 subscribers. Do be sure to subscribe to The Saintly CEO, our weekly newsletter that will help you learn how to run your business like a saint in under 5 minutes, plus show you other entrepreneurs who are doing stuff like you. Really cool stuff a lot of times. And then finally, if you are looking for a peer group of other Catholic entrepreneurs, consider joining our Catholic Founders peer group. We're calling it the Catholic Founders Guild. It's $10 a month or $100 a year. Just go to our Substack and upgrade to paid. You'll also get access to all of our paywalled content as part of this. Again, thank you so much for tuning in general. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.